So a viewer of mine, and I think it was McDonald. Oh, McDonald stated that we should have a farm. Well, no, that's not what he said. He said we should preserve culture, something along those lines, or asked if we should or shouldn't we, intimating that maybe the answer to that question is yes. Now, I'm not responding to McDonald because I don't know what he meant specifically, nor do I know how he defines culture or which culture it is that he, indeed, if that is what he's thinking, he thinks we should preserve, right? So, but I am responding to what I see as this prevailing, at least in some communities, I guess, if not society at large, this sentiment that we should preserve culture, right? And I will call it a platitude, right? Kind of a meaningless statement in my view. Because, first of all, culture is dynamic, right? What At what point in our cultural development do we stop progressing, right? Or changing, advancing? Well, not even that necessarily, but evolving, I guess. All of those imply better, right? So, not even that, but at what point should culture stop changing and we should preserve it as it is? Or what arbitrary, I would say, maybe not, point in the past should we go back to when culture was what it was and preserve that, right? Again, culture is dynamic. Why should we preserve it? Do you think that people, let's say more than 100 years ago, expressed this sentiment much? That we should preserve culture, so on and so forth? No, not really. This is a fairly new phenomenon, I would say. Why? Well, because it's a natural reaction to, and maybe there were other movements prior to the ones I will mention now, but insofar as I can tell, it's a natural reaction to the countercultural movement of the 60s that went against culture, obviously, and the current cancel culture, or as I present it, which is, in my opinion, the more precise way of putting it, which clarifies things. It's the canceling of culture. It's not a culture of canceling, because that doesn't make any fucking sense. It's the canceling of culture. Let me take a sip of my coffee. So maybe you're already kind of seeing where I'm going with this, maybe not. But looking at this definition here might help you or not in doing so. But check it out. I think the biggest problem that I have with this platitude, why I call it a platitude, is because, well, people don't seem to know, or at the very least agree unanimously on what culture is, right? We'll take something like gang culture, right? And we'll call it, we're calling something like that culture, right? That's not culture, right? We'll take the counter-cultural movement, right? And we'll call it the hippie culture, which is just fucking incoherent, right? The name itself tells you that it's against culture, right? Why is that culture, right? But that's because the definition of culture has been changed, right? Muddled. Some things have been taken out, right? Like the current definition of culture is that it's the arts and other manifestations of human intellectual achievement regarded collectively, right? What sort of arts and, right, other manifestations of human intellect does gang culture possess, right? Maybe you could take this definition and apply it to the hippies, right? I don't know. They have their, were those even their clothes, right? But they had a certain way of dressing themselves. I think they just took clothes from other cultures, right? And I don't know. They didn't design and produce their own clothes, not really, right? For example, what arts did the hippies have? What arts did they create, right? Was there much intellectual achievement when it came to the hippies? I guess you could argue, maybe, given this definition, that there was vestiges of that there, but I don't know. I guess I don't know enough about the hippie culture. But when it comes to gang culture, right? Even if you maybe somehow could apply this definition to a counter cultural movement like the hippies, what arts does the gang culture, what art do they have they created, right? You could kind of maybe argue that some of the tattoos are art, but I mean, is that really art? The shit they put on their bodies, and is it really theirs, right? But even if I grant you that part of it, right? The definition right here says the arts and other manifestations of human intellectual achievement. One intellectual achievement have been brought to us by gangs, right? So even by this postmodern, I don't know, this current definition of culture, gang culture doesn't fit in, right? And yet we call it that. We call it culture, right? Even if you could somehow fit hippies into this, which I would argue probably not, you know, that's being called culture too. So what's happened, long fucking story short, over the years is the definition of culture has been diluted, changed. It's to a point where it's almost meaningless, right? So what is culture, right? What does it mean to, I don't know, culture bacteria in a lab, right? It means to grow, multiply, right? Culture means to cultivate, right? Whether it be your mind or a certain art form, or, you know, certain kind of architecture, let's say, right? All of that is culture, right? But what is the cornerstone or the foundation of any human culture up until this point, right? What is the very foundation without which you cannot have culture, right? Agriculture. That's the most important one, right? Without that, you don't have culture, right? That's why it's in the name, right? You grow things. Well, what are you growing? Well, fuel for the human being, right? You're growing things, animals, plants, in order to be able to grow humans, right? In order to be able to, who in turn produce, I guess you would say, culture, right? Without us growing our own food, we cannot claim, in other words, we cannot claim to have culture. It won't be our own culture, right? But that's not in the definition anymore, right? Because you're not supposed to understand what culture is, how to create, preserve culture, right? Just look at, if you're maybe somehow skeptical about my definition, it's not my definition. This is the definition of culture. It's in the fucking name, right? Agriculture. Can human? I mean, this is obvious, right? Should be. Can human societies, at least up until this point, can we exist without agriculture? Yeah, we can, right? We were able to, but that's no longer what our society looks like, right? Yeah, they'll tell you we're post-agricultural agricultural, we're now post-industrial, whatever. Yeah, but those are different. Those are different paradigms. Those are different ways of looking at society, right? We're still, the reason why we exist right now is because we still have agriculture, obviously, right? But when you look at human societies prior to agriculture, right? Say hunters and gatherers, if that ever existed, except for, small societies here and there, remote societies here and there. How often, right? Even with our whacked out definition of culture, right? How often do we talk about those people and use terms such as culture, right? The hunter-gatherer culture, right? They didn't have culture. They didn't grow anything, or not much anyway, right? They were mostly consumers. And it feels like we're coming full circle, right? With a whole bunch of technological advancements and intellectual advancements on top. So this definition in front of you, ignoring agriculture, right? The things that we grow and create in order to be able to grow our minds and create art, having been taken out of the agriculture not being part of culture anymore, it would seem, at least when it comes to the definition, what just reflects where we're moving as a society, right? So you'll see some of these people who are very much pro preserving culture, right? I guess you would call them, I don't know, trads or something, but like the real ones, not the ones that just yap, right? But the ones that actually do it. And they're going back to the land, right? Some of them are even making their own clothes, right? They're growing their food in some capacity, to some degree, maybe all of their food, you know what I mean? And that's culture, right? That is the very cornerstone of culture. So if you take that away from the people, right? Or if we as people outsource it to somebody else, right? Let's say a select few farmers who are fewer and fewer every day as everything gets mechanized and farmers are getting pushed out, and our food supply is being continually destroyed, taken away from us, obviously, in order to depopulate the planet and better control us. As we're outsourcing that, right, while at the same time talking about wanting to preserve culture. And again, I'm not responding to McDonald. I don't know what he does or how he does it, right? That's a little fucking ignorant, right? If you want to preserve culture, right? If you want to be able to look, I don't even know what culture you have in mind, right? Like what kind of fancy folk dress or what current manifestation of your language, or the types of meals that you eat. I don't know what it is that, at what point in time in your particular cultural development in the particular geographical area where you live, I don't know at what point in time you want to freeze that and preserve it, right? And that's not even all that important to me, because all of that is dynamic, and I see no reason why we should try to freeze it. I mean, if you want, I don't got a problem with that. If you want to preserve some kind of specific type of culture, I mean, at the end of the day, culture is dynamic, right? When you say preserve culture, what I immediately think of is not to safeguard something, but to do something, right? Not preserve culture. I think, well, do culture, right? Cultivate something. Whatever the hell it is, right? If you want to preserve culture, well, then preserve culture. What's the problem, right? Are you doing it? And how do you do that? Well, I don't know. You could start by growing your own food, encouraging others around you to do the same. Make your own clothes, right? Cook your own food. How do you preserve a certain kind of cuisine, right? Whatever that may be, when you don't have control of the food supply. How do you cultivate culture by going to the supermarket, right? How do you preserve the kind of culture you want to preserve? How can you be in control of what this culture looks like, right? Let's just say when it comes to the food that you eat, because that's part of it, right? When you don't have any control over what food is produced, right? We live in a society where, I don't know, for a lot of us, right? Most of our food comes from very, very far away and is grown by people we have nothing in, well, let me not say that. We have little in common with, or they're you wouldn't even consider them part of your culture, right? But there you are, eating the food that they produced, right? And the same could be said about clothes, right? The books that we read, right? Um, the music that we listen to, right? Just about everything, at least to some degree, has been outsourced to what you would call members of another culture, right? No. Not to say that there aren't some little vestiges here and there of, oh, what do we call it? Indigenous culture, maybe? Left here and there. However advanced they may be, or however that has changed over the years to become what it is. Uh, we all have, most of us all over the world, we're part of the same global culture, right? What country on this planet produces its own food, energy, makes its own clothes, right? So on and so forth. Sticks to, or draws from, if not exclusively, mainly from the thinkers, indigenous thinkers, right? Has had their own philosophy, right? Developed their collective mind without much influence from the outside. And I'm not putting value judgments on any of this stuff. I'm not saying this is bad, that is, well, outsourcing your food, yeah, that's bad. That's bad. Letting somebody else produce your energy, be in control of your energy sources, whether it be food or heat, calories, yeah, that's bad, right? That's outsourcing culture. You're giving somebody else the power to dictate what culture is, right? And that's how we find ourselves in this global culture today. This is what we have, right? Which is why you have institutions such as, or corporations such as the UN, right? Safeguarding culture, um, preserving these little towns in these various places all over the world, putting all kinds of like sanctions and incentives, telling people what they can and cannot build, or basically just creating these open air museums, right? With these heritage sites all over the world where you can't change the way those places there are, right? And I think that somehow answers to a lot of people's, maybe in many instances, subconscious desire to preserve culture, right? Because, well, you've been taken off the land. But I do believe that a lot of people still intuitively, innately, or instinctively, that fucks them up, and they want to go back to it, right? Which is why you have, all these ladies tending to their flower garden, or growing maybe a tomato plant in the backyard, right? That's why you have all these dudes mowing their beautiful lawns and shit of that nature, right? Because it's in them, right? They, it's whatever that is, right? Maybe it's God, right? That innate desire hasn't quite been bred out of us, right? Not yet. So if only subconsciously we yearn for culture, right? We want to be able to grow. We've done this for, I don't know, 10,000 years, they say, maybe longer, right? And we've outsourced that we've given that power away to someone else, and now they control our lives. That's part of the reason why they control our lives, right? But it's in you. The desire's still there. It's just been channeled into something else, right? So on some level, people understand that culture is important, but they don't really know why, right? Because the definition has changed, and now you're being told, "Oh well, it's that pretty dress that folk singer or whatever dancer is wearing, right? That's culture. Oh, it's these dishes, you know what I mean, that cost a shit ton of money and are only served in a select fewer and fewer restaurants, right? Everything is fusion now, but that's the global culture. But here and there you still have these like authentic restaurants, right? Or you could go to one of these World Heritage sites where all the houses are made out of wood and there's still people cooking food the way they did 200, 300, 500 years ago. Maybe not that long ago, but you have these little museums, essentially, little vestiges of culture that have been preserved to, well, pacify you, placate, to fulfill some kind of a need that you have in you innately, right? To be part of cultural creation, to take part in culture, while at the same time changing the definition of what culture really is, and so that you don't fully understand it, right? So that you can't be involved in creating culture, right? So that you outsource it to somebody else, and you don't even realize it, right? In many instances, I'm not saying nobody understands this the way I do, but most people don't, right? So the arts and the books that we have written and the philosophical advancements, I guess, that doesn't make much sense, does it? But let's say the philosophy, right? And the architecture and all the song and dance that we've created over the years, that's not really culture, right? I mean, it's part of culture. What is it? Well, those are the fruits, right? Cultural fruits. These are the products that culture bears, right? But how do you get fruit, right? Where does food come from? Well, the supermarket, obviously, right? Right. In order, obviously, shout out to all the vegans out there who don't know this. So maybe it's not so obvious to them, fruit or tubers or whatever it may be, right? Is that we consume, right, in order to have energy to be able to engage in culture, right? To do cultural creation. Well, that's part of a larger whole, a plant, right? So that fruit you pick off the tree is part of the tree, right? With its leaves, branches, roots, obviously, right? That's part of that needs the soil, so on and so forth, and all the elements, and perhaps some care too, right? All of that, if you will, right? That's culture, right? But we're only being given, sold, presented with the fruit, and we're being told, this is all you need, right? That's culture, right? No. That no. How did it get here, right? And once again, shout out to all the vegans, because if there ever was a modern equivalent or current equivalent to the hippie culture, those are the people, right? The vegans. They don't fucking do a goddamn thing except tell you what you need to be not doing. Completely and utterly anti-culture, right? Veganism is a modern day countercultural movement, right? Alongside with the culture, the canceling of culture, right? Or perhaps independent thought, right? Intellectual development, growing your mind, right? You can't do that, right? You have to cancel that. You can't have ideas of your own, right? Or ideas that go against how we tell you to think, right? So, yeah, I don't think, in closing, most people understand what culture really is, what 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 it entails to have cultural creation. Uh, they say these things, that culture is important. We need to preserve culture because they're brainwashed to believe this by these various institutions, which at the same time fulfill some kind of an innate need that they may not be able to conceptualize or articulate themselves what it is exactly. They These institutions and the powers that be pander to that sort of innate feeling desire that we have, the want to do culture, and they redirect it in the direction that they want you to go, right? So culture will never die, right? But because we are increasingly outsourcing culture creation to the controllers, we're no, we have no choice but to give what they take us and cry about it, right? And because they know they've taken it away from us, they placate to us and try to pacify us with, pretty museums and nice little folk songs or whatever, right? Fancy restaurants with, authentic cuisine, shit, things of that nature, right? The travel and hospitality industry, whatever the fuck, right? Films, books. So yeah, well, this idea that we should preserve culture, well, why should we? Maybe I answered that in this video, right? But um, if indeed that is what you want, okay, why don't you, right? Why do you eat foods that come from who knows where the fuck they come from, right? Why does your speech include more and more acronyms or whatever the fuck they're called, right? And emojis even, right? How come you don't hand write much at all anymore, right? Well, why don't you make your own clothes? Why don't you grow your own food, right? Why do you why are you part of this global culture while at the same time saying you don't want to be, right? What are we preserving? What is it that you want? You want to be in control of the cultural process, right? You want to be you want to participate in creation, right? Well, then do it. Old MacDonald had a farm. E-I-E-I. Yo.